Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football Thursday afternoon. Many of y'all know what that means. Time to update the ACC power rankings heading into week 8. Now, after this first minute, it's going to go downhill. A lot of y'all are going to get really frustrated with me over the next 15 minutes, but let's start the first minute with some good vibes. And a hot take I'll start with that I think a lot of ACC fans might be able to agree with me on. And that is, does this ACC, does this conference have the best quarterback play that we see from across the country? And you look at the Big Ten, horrible. I'm a Michigan fan, bad quarterback play. That is not a conference that's known for the quarterback play. It never has been. You look at the Big 12, just don't think that conference is very good at football, period. And then you look at the SEC, and that would probably be the argument you would want to make and say, look at the quarterback play in the SEC and say it hasn't been that impressive. A lot of the names that we thought were going to play really good football have been solid. They haven't been great. And then I'm stacking these ACC teams and say, all right, Cam Ward, I think's been the best quarterback in the country. You look at Cade Klubnik, he is sneakily having a phenomenal year for Clemson. You look at Kevin Jennings, ever since he's taken over that offense at SMU, he's played really good football. Tyler Shuck, you guys know my thoughts on him, pretty solid quarterback. Pitt with Eli Holstein, Kyle McCord with Syracuse, Kyron Jones at Virginia Tech, Haynes King, Anthony Calandria at Virginia, been playing good football. Thomas Castellanos at Boston College, although inconsistent at times, we know what he can do. I'm looking at this conference and say, I like a lot of the quarterbacks that we see in the ACC. Now, are all these quarterbacks really, really consistent? Guys like Haynes King or Anthony Calandria, Thomas Castellanos, or even Kyron Jones at times struggle with consistency? Yeah, absolutely. The talent at the quarterback position in this conference, it's been fun to watch at the very least. So I would love to hear your thoughts and opinions on that. Now it's time to get a lot of y'all upset at me. Again, the best part about doing it, let it fly in the comment section. Like, this is college football. This is the best part about college football, talking about it, arguing about it. So let it fly in the comment section. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. And without further ado, let's get into this one. Let's start at the top. No movement. Miami, Clemson still, to me, seem like the best two football teams in this conference. Now, I cannot believe the amount of criticism that Miami is getting for winning football games. Yeah, they played a sloppy game against Cal where they gave up some explosive plays. They figured out a way to win a football game. This is college football. Like, look at the SEC. Alabama just lost to Vanderbilt. Tennessee lost to Arkansas. It is hard to consistently play good football and win games. And so I saw an ACC power rankings with Miami as the third best team in the ACC, which to me is absolutely criminal, absolutely insane. Now, if you want to argue that maybe Clemson's really closing the gap with Miami, I certainly would have that discussion. But the way I look at it right now, Miami, the quarterback play of Cam Ward, this is the number one scoring offense in the country. I think this defense is going to continue to get better, especially in the back end as they get more experience under their belts. I still have Miami as the number one team in the ACC. With that being said, Clemson is, 4 weeks ago, I think you would have had Miami as that kind of sole number one, with Clemson kind of being that 1B. I think that conversation is changing. Like, you look at Clemson and what this offense looks like. It's top 15 scoring offense in the country. They're running the football really well. Cade Klubnik is by far playing the best football that we've seen from him in his career. I think that Miami-Clemson discussion is getting really, really exciting. And to me, from the eyeball test, from the talent perspective, I think these are the two best teams clearly in the ACC. Now, I think what makes this conference really fun is you look at this dark horse category and say there are some teams that really excite you, especially on the offensive side of the football. SMU makes the switch to Kevin Jennings. This team has looked just fundamentally different. You look at SMU's only one loss. It was to BYU, who's an undefeated top 15 team in the country right now. And quite frankly, you run that football game back with Kevin Jennings taking every single snap at quarterback. I think SMU wins that football game. Like, this SMU team is becoming very dangerous. Kind of the team that if you were a believer in SMU coming into the season, like that fast-paced, high offense that can put up a lot of points, that's the SMU we're starting to see. And so if you're an SMU believer in 2024, you're kind of seeing that team come into what we thought it was going to be. You look at Louisville, they had two tough losses, obviously one to SMU, one to Notre Dame, where they outgained Notre Dame by over 100 yards in that football game. This Miami-Louisville game, I think, is going to be a lot more fun than people think. Now, I think Miami fans are actually given the respect that Louisville deserves. This Louisville team, it's really good. Yeah, and I've liked their roster going back to the preseason in 2024, and they've had some frustrating losses. But even the SMU fans would say, like, yeah, that Louisville team, especially on the offensive side of the football, it can do some things. Now, I think the storyline for Louisville is that defense not as good as I think we expected them to be in 2024. And we didn't think they'd be a top 10 unit in the country, but we thought they'd be, a pretty dang solid unit in the ACC. And I don't know if you've gotten that level of defense that we expected. You look at Pitt and Syracuse. I think Pitt and Syracuse are very similar football teams. They are putting a lot of points up on the board. Eli Holstein and Kyle McCord have been playing very good football. Now, why I have them, maybe a little bit lower than some people might, is that I look at Pitt and Syracuse and say they're winning football games, and I have to give credit where I think it's due. There are some underlying concerns about both of these teams, and it really does start at the quarterback spot where Kyle McCord and Eli Holstein are playing very good football. Both of them are top 10 in the country in turnover-worthy plays. Like, they are putting the ball at harm's way a lot during these football games, and they're kind of getting away with some of those, quote-unquote disaster plays. My question is, can you keep getting away with those kind of plays over the next couple of weeks? That's probably the question that you have, and I think there's an element where both Pitt and Syracuse, like, hey, what's the best competition that these teams are playing? Where you look at SMU, or I think more importantly, a team like Louisville, and say, Louisville's played some really good teams, lost to some really good teams, but I think they've looked pretty good. That's kind of where I sit with Pitt and Syracuse. But my caveat to that is, when you have a quarterback like Eli Holstein or Kyle McCord that can put up the yards and points that these two teams can, they're dangerous in the ACC, and that's why you got to have them at that dark horse category. Now, moving down to the outside looking in, this is where I kind of drew the line in the sand. Pitt and Syracuse, all four of those teams have really exciting quarterbacks, right? Kyron Jones, Haynes King, Anthony Calandria, and Thomas Castellanos. These are all quarterbacks that can be extremely dangerous. They all can hurt you with their legs. They all can throw off platform, get outside the pocket. They can be tough quarterbacks to deal with. The reason I have them below Pitt and Syracuse, it really comes down to the consistency. Eli Holstein and Kyle McCord have consistently put together pretty damn good performances. You look at some of these other quarterbacks and say it's been a little bit more of a roller coaster. I think their highs are just as high as teams like Pitt and Syracuse, but the lows, we're seeing them a little bit more, and maybe they're a little bit more low as well. Let's start with Virginia Tech. I think this team's finding its stride. They played Miami very, very well. They routed Stanford, who's kind of a tricky team to deal with, coming off a bye, playing tonight against Boston College. A lot of people expected Virginia Tech to be one of those dark horse contenders, and I think from the Miami and Stanford football game, we're starting to see Virginia Tech turn into that dark horse caliber team, and with a convincing win at home against Boston College tonight, I could see Virginia Tech kind of putting themselves back in that dark horse category, because I think look at that roster and say, there's a lot to get behind. Like, we know Kyron Jones can play really good football. That pass rush is one of the best pass rushes that we see not only in this conference, but in the country. They got some difference makers at wide receiver. I think they got a really good running back in Bashal Tutin. There's some things about Virginia Tech that you kind of like. Now you just want to see a little bit more consistency. Now that's why I have them on this third tier as opposed to that dark horse tier. They start stringing together some more consistent performances of what I think this Virginia Tech team can do. I'm moving back up. Georgia Tech, again, Haynes King. You got a really good running back in Jamal Haynes. A defense that has clearly taken a step. Georgia Tech's another one of those dangerous teams in Virginia, a team that hand up, like I just kind of missed on. I knew Anthony Calandria was an exciting cat last year as a true freshman. I didn't think we'd see the step that we've seen from this kid. I mean, you look at Anthony Calandria and say, yeah, he is still making those really exciting plays that can win you football games, but he's limiting the amount of times he's turning the football over and doing things that make you scratch your head. I don't think this Virginia team is super, super talented, but when you have a quarterback like Anthony Calandria, like, you can get yourself in a lot of football games. Just ask teams like Boston College or Louisville. You look at Boston College, I think kind of a similar conversation you have with BC. I look at the talent and say, there's probably a gap between some of the top teams in the ACC, but Thomas Castellanos can be a really exciting football player. Then you look at, the bottom tier of the ACC, and I think the quarterback play drops off, but I think overall the talent drops off, and you have kind of some significant questions about these teams. You guys kind of know my opinion on Duke. I've been low on them, even though they've continued to win games. They're sitting at 5-1. Cal has one of those quarterbacks that I like in Fernando Mendoza. They got some weapons, especially Jaden Ott at the running back room. The offensive line is just not where it needs to be. And we kind of know, like, when you're playing high-end college football, if you have an offensive line that's that big of a problem, it's really hard to consistently win games. Stanford is a fun team to watch, but you can tell they're kind of sitting at a little bit of a lower talent level, and they got to really scheme on offense if they want to get some things going. North Carolina with Mac Brown's a disaster. Florida State, utter disaster. And I just don't know how much. I know there's excitement about Brock Glenn taking over this offense, but the Florida State fans, y'all kind of know my takes on Florida State. There's a lot more problems than just the quarterback, right? DJU wasn't good, but when you have an offensive line that is one of the worst in the conference in pass protection, to couple that with a running game that's one of the worst in the entire country, the quarterback play matters. Any quarterback's going to struggle with what Florida State's working with on offense. Wake Forest, NC State, rounding out the ACC. That bottom tier, and even kind of towards that third tier, like the ACC, you can get some wins and losses from a lot of these different teams. It's a very hard conference towards the bottom half to predict. That's kind of how I stack these teams. Would love to hear from y'all in the comment section. A lot of different takes and a lot of different ways you can stack the ACC. But again, my biggest takeaway is I think the quarterback play is, at the very least, it's exciting. Now, is it a little bit inconsistent with some of these quarterbacks? Yeah, sure it is. But the quarterback play is really fun. And I think that's what makes this ACC conference so exciting to watch every single Saturday. We'll close it out there. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later.